I know this is probably a school board issue, but with Lowther North and South, if you all had a wish list or something, is there something that the city sees would be good uses for those buildings, whether it be residential or somehow recreational or entertainment because of the way the buildings are constructed and the gyms and the auditoriums they have or something? And is this anything that concerns the city about how those buildings might ultimately best be used? I mean, depending, of course, on if anybody would want to buy them and do that, but any thoughts about how that would benefit the city to have those buildings used?
Well, I'll address it from the rec center side. Well, we discussed that briefly. You know, it depends on, they want to sell the buildings as a whole. So, you know, I even thought the process ought to be slowed down a little bit to where, you know, hey, if we have a new industry come in town that we may need space again, once again, for our students. And then if the buildings are sold, you're looking at what? Building new buildings again. So, you know, their philosophy over at the school district is they want to move them off their, which, you know, that's their prerogative. They've had studies that I haven't seen, so they may be better educated than I am about the whole process. But your question about what the city would like to see, I think that...
I mean, just if you had your druthers about a good usage for that building from the city's point of view.
Well, I think number one, we're talking about the downtown historic revitalization tax and the historic tax credits, and if that will help those buildings immensely because they fall under that, and if a person was to buy them, they could get a lot of tax credits to make improvements. So I think that's going to help move those buildings off of dead center if that does actually get passed and enacted in the downtown area. It'll help the possible new developer on that. You know, obviously housing, you know, that's the big talk that they do with a lot of those schools is the housing issue. You know, there's been an article in the paper and they discussed, you know, the possible spin-off to where the gyms could still be used by the public or the rec center or the school district. Same way with the theaters as well. I don't know if there's a true answer, you know, to what would be great to see with an older building. I mean, everybody's going to have to look at them because they're going to be a lot of money to tear those things down. So I don't, you know, really see that happening. They're still a pretty sound building for a use of some kind. Maybe somebody else can chime in with some other ideas. I'll open it up to anybody else that has anything.
Well, if I could just add, I'm not speaking for any of the commissioners, obviously, but I think that first and foremost, you know, the city doesn't want to see them become a white elephant that becomes difficult or more importantly, are not maintained. Not only for the aesthetic values, but obviously the costs associated with that and any enforcement actions that might be required. Having said that, I'm not sure that the commissioners have not only, as we've identified, 72 hours in the job, but more to the point is because the city doesn't own them or have any control over them, I think it's more a matter of waiting to see what the school district wants to do. They're the ones who are in the driver's seat, and they'll make the decision. And so it's hard for us to think about, I wish it was X or Y because we have no control over that. Having said that, I think at some point we will. We have informed the school district as well that anything that they do with those buildings is probably going to require the approval of the city because the property is zoned public and for school use only. So unless it's run as a school, it's going to require something from the city. And so we're encouraging them to continue to work with our partners and to identify some, you know, you tell us what you want to do and we can take a look at it, and obviously this commission will ultimately have some sort of say over that, but that, you know, they need to be cognizant of that, and that I think our concerns are going to be, how does it impact the neighborhood, how does it impact the overall economic viability in the community, those kinds of things. Also, we had a good group working together between the school board, Main Street, Chamber, RDA, and the city have been meeting to talk about some of those issues. So, again, these commissioners having a chance to see that, not only because they're new, but we really can only wait for the school board to do something. But on the other hand, we are trying to work with the school board to find something that we think may be a very viable process. But again, I don't want to speak for what the commissioners may want to see.
I think one of the things probably we have to look at is that period of time from 1895 to about 1922. There was a significant number of buildings of that caliber and quality built for education throughout this region: Kansas, Nebraska, Missouri. Although, you know, as our communities grew significantly in that era, and so there's a lot of those buildings now that 100 years later are beginning to, you know, outlive their current life as an educational institution, as they want to move more towards you know, a ranch style, one level, multiple level, things like that. And so one of the struggles we'll deal with is that there are a lot of buildings like that on the market right now that are available. Communities, Leavenworth just sold their building, a similar building to that'd be the same quality and size. Other communities within Kansas, Missouri, elsewhere. And so it'll be a competitive market on the low side, unfortunately, because there are so many of them available, and one of those things will come whatever communities really want to be aggressive about something happening there. And so that's probably an initial struggle we'll have to look at as a community. You know, we can look at the tax roll, you know, valuation from the assessor and see that the buildings are valued, you know, in excess of $750,000, closer to $1 million on them. But we know that the market value on those is nowhere near that. And that's going to be a tough thing to think about. But replacing those buildings, we have to also consider, because in order to construct something of that level, at this point in time, you're talking about multiple, probably even the tens of millions of dollars for a construction quality of that. And hopefully, if you guys have had a chance to visit the buildings, I think you should. They're great construction, still in fantastic you know, shape. The crews that have maintained those for the last 10, 20, 30, even 100 years have really taken pride in those buildings, which is great. And you can see that when you walk through. And so, as you asked, what would we see? My ideal, from our perspective, and this would be more perspective from Main Street, from my experience with that organization, is that those would become redeveloped as what could currently be called life center type opportunities, in which it includes residential, but also includes spaces for commercial, for retail, plus, you know, office space, and then also community space. And so it would be a nice mix. There are developers out there that do that. And some of them have shown interest in the community, have come down and have visited the buildings. And so as long as we can find somebody that understands how to put that package together, like Kevin had mentioned, using those tax credits, once, you know, we are able to complete the process for the historic district for our downtown area, which will encompass those buildings and give them access to tax credits on the state and federal level, plus additional possible tax credits that could be in the new market realm on the federal level. Housing tax credits exist for low income or elderly housing, but those are a really, really competitive market and are tough to get into. And so it's finding somebody that knows how to access those and use those as leverages for funds and developing them that can make use of those buildings. And that, from my perspective, that's what I like to see. Those are some of the nicest buildings and architectural design buildings that still represent our community. And if we tear them down because we assume that one block space is more value to be redeveloped, we really lose part of our culture and our heritage as a community. And so from just my individual perspective, not any rule that I'd have, my goal would be to redevelop and use those properties, whether they be commercial space, residential space, maybe another educational institution. All those play into mine, but I think preserving those buildings should be a priority for our community, you know, because we start to lose our identity when we start to lose the things that last longer than we do.
Any other questions?